There's something that you told me or admitted to me before we started recording, and you said there's nothing I like more than bringing up the firewood at my house in Japan. Why?
Yeah. Well, I've long been a student of Buddhism and in particular Zen. And I didn't realize that I would marry one day a wonderful woman from Tokyo who was a Buddhist and get to know Japan. I've probably been there 20 times now. And I always think about Buddhism when I'm there because Buddhism is an orderly vision of the world in which the smallest things are done with the greatest care and in which everything small, from cooking to fashioning a piece of wood into a recognizable sculpture, is meditation. It's all meditation. And I'll never forget a Zen statement I heard once that said, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. And just to focus on the simple things in life, the repetitive simple things, is hugely calming and satisfying and gets rid of a lot of the anxieties that we have in the West and that I've had all my life just from all the crazy things I've done. But I go back to doing something simple like cooking or carrying the wood. Right now I'm fretting a little bit because some workmen have now stained our porch and our mountain house porch in Tateshina. And my wife told me they moved all the wood under the house. And then I thought, well, they're going to just have to move it back because it belongs next to the door on the porch where you can go out in the coldest weather and pick up, 6 logs or 10 logs and bring them in. But then I'm thinking I might just have to change my meditation and go down under the house to bring them up.
Right.
So I don't know why, and also because when I was a kid, campfires and starting a fireplace was very important to me. My family in Louisiana were fishermen and hunters, and it's nothing like the Louisiana of today that we read about and see about on Fox News. It's nothing then was like now. The Cajuns were very simple people who lived in the fields and in the swamps and did simple things well and got huge joy from them, from doing the simplest things. Just from baiting a hook. Watching my Uncle Ed bait a hook was another Zen experience because he had a certain way of doing it, and he always did it the exact same way, and he always got the exact same bait to use. And there's something comforting in a world that is moves so fast and throws so many things at you all the time. And so I hope that answers your question. But
Well, I like it. I like it because envisioning somebody with a fishing hook, envisioning somebody with firewood in their arms, both those people are about to engage with an element of the earth that allows you to be reflective. Like staring at a fire and staring at water has both have the same effect.
Yeah, we go there once a year for a month, and I can't tell you what percentage of the time I am just staring at the fire, but it's moved from probably 50% to 80% because there's nothing more, joyful and centering than just staring at a fire, logs burning.
Well, there's also staring at mountains. So we talked about staring at mountains. You spent a lot of time in Italy, teaching in Italy, living in Italy, traveling in Italy, as well as Japan. In both countries, they are full of mountains.
Right.
What is it about mountains that has whatever effect it has on you?
Mountains are constant reminders of something bigger in life, that there is something to aspire for in life. They're, they're reminders of the greatness of life to me. And, and fires are reminders of the determination of life and just the beauty of life and the beauty of the comfort they stand for. And so mountains, I remember when I was studying the Renaissance, Francesco Petrarch, probably the first real Renaissance man, wrote a story called the Ascent of Mont Ventoux.
Uh-huh.
He lived in southern France at the time, and one day he just decided to climb this mountain, and nobody had ever done that before. Nobody had ever. He was on the way up the mountain, and a shepherd stopped him and asked him where he was going, and he said, "To the top of the mountain." And he said, "Why?" And he said, "Just to see from there, just to look at the world from there." And the shepherd looked at him like he was patently insane. And it turns out that in the history of the Western culture, nobody had ever climbed a mountain before just to climb the mountain. And that was part of what I'm talking about, the constant aspiration. When I went to Georgetown, I had studied a lot of Latin already, so I could easily read the motto of the university, which said, ad astra per aspera, to the stars through difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
That was the motto of the Jesuit order. And isn't that life? I mean, it's just difficulties of every kind. And you have to develop your perspective toward those difficulties and find joy in dealing with them. One of my favorite metaphors that I've used throughout my career is Sisyphus, pushing his rock up the hill,
Mm-hmm.
and then it rolls down the hill,
Mm-hmm.
and he goes down
Only
the
to
hill
go
and
back.
starts pushing it up again. And at the end of his brilliant essay called The Myth of Sisyphus, Albert Camus said, "One has to imagine that Sisyphus is happy." That wonderful book starts with, the only important philosophical question is the question of suicide. Whether a man should embrace the difficulties of life, or whether he should abandon them by committing suicide. And he starts talking about Sisyphus, and at the end he makes that statement, one has to imagine that Sisyphus is happy, because it's the only explanation of that myth that makes any sense. What do you do with a life that is constantly undoing your best intentions, and so that you have to rebuild?
Well, I'm wondering how much of that is a reflection of how human beings treat the living reality. So I say it, and let me dot that I a little bit with this. You told me that there's something about competition that didn't sit well with you, and you said in the creative world, competition is not the point of what you do, because we were talking about the competitive world and how the world is competitive, and there's something, you had something strong to say about that. So you said competition is not the point of what you do, it's the expression that is the point of it.
Right. And it's weird. I had a flash in the last 2 days, a flash of happiness based on the fact that I read an article that one of my clients sent me. I think it was a New York article. I'm not sure, but I should tell you what it is. About how this is the worst of all times in Hollywood. That it never has the market been as bad as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Never has the future been more uncertain, for a dozen reasons, going back to COVID and before, going back to the great conglomeration when all the studios were bought by international conglomerates, same as happened in publishing, where all the publishers of 48 major publishers, as we used to call them, were bought by four publishers. Never has it been as bad as it is right now. And to me, that gave me great joy, because I thought, So all you have to do is what you love to do
Yeah.
because you can't control the
Yeah.
surroundings.
Yeah.
You
That's right.
can't handle the news.
Mm.
You can't handle what, you know, the politicians are doing to our country and to the world. Um, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Just focus on storytelling and what you love to do, which is stories. And, and that's a weird reaction, I think, to what's going on because you can watch all the news in the world and it's not going to make you feel any better. And there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, go to a demonstration or write a letter to your congressman or whatever you can do. But that doesn't take very long and you've got a whole life. As the Italians say, there's more time than life.
Love it.
There's, there's time. It's amazing how much time there is in this world. I mean, people ask me all the time, how could you have done 35 movies and hundreds of books and, sold hundreds of books? And I don't know. Why? How do I do it? I don't do anything else. And
You just do it.
what I feel is I wish I could have done many more. And if I had used my time wisely, I probably could have. So I don't understand. People say when I don't have time, because everybody has the same amount of time.
Well,
And
let me bring the viewer to a couple of things because now you see I'm making connections here as you speak with past conversations that we've had and the past one that I had with you. So taking this thread, it's not difficult to understand or see at the very least that art, lots of art comes out of chaos, comes out of strife, comes out of the need for survival. There is an earlier podcast episode that we recorded with a guy named Chris Duffin very early on, like in the first year, first 6 months of our podcast. And he talked about growing up in Northern California with two parents. He says they were next level genius, but they decided to live out of the matrix. And so they lived in a log cabin that they built. There was no plumbing. We lived by the wits that we had and by survival skills that we learned as little kids. We would kill stuff and eat it. And he said the toilets were our buckets. And then so I asked him, what was your day like? And he gave me three things that he would do. And the third thing that he said, just out of the blue, for me out of the blue, he says, I would just do art. Like, what do you mean just do art? He would just do art as a kid. For him, that was a natural thing to say. He didn't need to explain it to me. You, on the other hand, not on the other hand, actually on the same hand, if I can say it, you were a professor, a tenured professor, and you were depressed about being a tenured professor. It felt like when you were telling me this that it was stifling for you to be a tenured professor.
yeah, suffocating is the word I used.
Okay. Why?
Why? Well, because I felt that my purpose in life was to express myself. Some famous statesman, I think Edmund Burke said, if you live, you should speak your mind. And I was always telling students, if you've got something to say, like some story to tell, and you don't tell it, to me, that's the most irresponsible thing a human can do. Because if you don't tell your story, who's going to tell your story?
Tell it? Mm-hmm.
You need to tell it. And no matter what it costs you, you got to do it. And I always felt that I had to express myself, and I was limited in my ability to do that by the wonderful constrictions of the academic world. I could tell you here in June that on October 6th of 2026, I'd be lecturing at 3 p.m. in the afternoon on book 6 of the Iliad. And, after doing that for 20 years, it got old. As much as I love the Iliad and would talk 3 hours about it if you let me, knowing that, living that kind of life where you had to go do certain things at certain times in the future, I thought this just doesn't feel right. And also, I was always writing about great writers, and I thought, I want to be involved in the making of writing, not just in the reporting on it and the criticizing of it. So that's why I left. I felt suffocated in it. So the suffocations polar opposite, was freedom, being free. And I really believed in freedom more than I do now. But the opposite of freedom was what I had. This depression accelerated and came to focus when I received tenure. I was chairman for the first 6 or 7 years at Occidental College of the untenured faculty against tenure, a committee, of that. And what am I going to do? I had to resign my chairmanship
Sure.
to remain, honest. And
they punished you in giving you tenure anyway. Yeah.
Exactly. And then I finally decided that if I really was, spoke my mind, followed my principles, I would resign and go off and do something, nuts, something free.
How long were you tenured? How long were you tenured before you left?
I was tenured for maybe 12 years.
Oh, it's a long time.
And it was personal. I mean, I had 2 kids, young children growing up, and one of my, faculty members don't make much money compared to, other people. I think firemen, make more money and so on. But and I was a tenured faculty member, which meant that I would make the same amount of money, with a 5% boost every year until the end of my career. And that could be as early as 55 or 60. And then after that, I would make the same amount of money for the rest of my life. That's security. My father, the accountant, totally approved of that, But I went from that to doing what I do now, where I literally don't know where the next dollar is coming from on a daily basis. And it doesn't get any better once you make a big movie. You have money for a couple of years, but you spend it all. You buy the car you've always been thinking about. You do what you have to, what people do with money. But money's never been really that important to me. But most of the time, I've been able to focus on creating things. And insecurity is the opposite of security, right? Mm-hmm. Freedom is insecure. And the more I thought about it and wrote about it, the more I realized that both of them are, illusions. Like the insecurity that I live in is an illusion because we're all insecure when you really look at it. It's all a matter of perspective. But it's an illusion. But then so is freedom. When you think about it, we all like to think that we're free, but look what's going on in the world right now. Is freedom real, or is it just some kind of a idea? And so I thought,
what is it?
It's an idea, and an idea in both cases dictates a behavior pattern, and so you have to figure out what is the right behavior pattern for freedom, and what is the right one for security. And my father was a god of security. He came from an extremely insecure background, went through the Depression, et cetera, and he became an accountant because he felt like a secure line of work, but then he lost his work and had to go through horrible things mentally until he got work again, which took 3 or 4 years. But he was such a secure guy with his own patterns that on a Saturday afternoon during a blizzard, if he was writing checks, he would not put the checks in the mail because he used to get in the car and drive to the post office to mail his checks, even in a blizzard. He said, first we have to stop at the bank. I go, why? Why can't we do that tomorrow? The snow is getting worse. He goes, no. You can't send checks out without having the money in the bank. All my life I have ignored that. Mm-hmm. But, that's my behavior pattern. His secure behavior pattern was to just do it right. No shortcuts, no workarounds. You know what I mean? So I just discovered that, having a life of freedom gives you that. You have to learn how to live with freedom, and it's difficult, really difficult. Living with securities is difficult too because it causes suffocation. But living with freedom means you have dreams of a wolf at the door. And I once decided, wait a minute, there's one way I can stop this dream, and that is to get up, get out of bed, walk to the front door, and open the door.
Hmm.
So I did that, and I never saw a wolf at the door, but so I stopped having those dreams.
It's curious that you used wolf. Isn't the wolf a creature of
That's
wisdom in indigenous cultures here?
Yeah, and it's a Roman thing. I mean,
Yeah.
Rome was founded by two wolves, so
Sure.
that's what popped into my mind. Even though I've never seen a wolf other than a zoo in my whole life. But
You need to hit those mountains.
we live in the metaphors that come to us either on purpose through education or just by accident.
Mm-hmm.
My father used to say to people about other people, he doesn't have a pot to piss in.
Right.
And I thought about that throughout my life. Wait a minute, do I have a pot that I could piss in? Yeah, I've never had to piss into a pot, but I definitely have a pot. Not worried about it. And he always said to save for a rainy day. And one day I stopped myself in the middle of a crisis, one of many financial crises, and I said to myself, what is a rainy day? I mean, other than rain, which from Louisiana, I used to actually go out and sit in the farmyard during the rain because I loved rain. My grandmother, I vividly remember she would come out and get me after screaming in vain from the house for me to come in because she was convinced I'd be hit by lightning.
Mm.
And apparently people in Louisiana get hit by lightning regularly. So we always thought about that. But saving for a rainy day, I go, well, what is a rainy day? If you have medical issues, there's insurance. If you have almost any kind of issues, there's a way to make the rain stop. Rain has just never been a threat. I used to dream that when I was down financially, I had dreamed that the doorbell would ring, and I would go there, and there'd be 6 people from the credit card companies there to take me away and lock me up. And that was actually a comforting dream because I thought being locked up wouldn't be so bad if that's the reason for it. But I never saw those guys. They never were at the door. They were faceless, mindless, careless, heartless computers who could care less. Whether they're sending you letter number 12 or number 382, So and then you look at, the governments of the world, including our own, and they're all deeply in debt and they're all borrowing. And the really important thing is that on a daily basis, you get to do what you love to do. And everything else is unimportant.
So how does somebody know what they love to do if they were brought up and truly believe that they need to they act out the philosophy of saving for a rainy day?
The only way you learn what you really love is by doing something you don't really love. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
I knew when I was a professor that I could not stand committees. And I spent a lot of time on committees.
Mm.
Now I don't have to go to committees. As Bernard Shaw said, if I die, I would not like to go to any more committee
Yeah,
meeting.
sure.
So I look back on my life, and most of my life now, I've never gone to a committee meeting. I don't have to report to a boss. And I learned that by doing those things. I learned how much I hated them by doing them. And I learned how much I loved. I mean, there could be a military, the National Guard, could be outside the house shooting at the house. And if I were in the middle of a coaching session with a client or in the middle of revising a screenplay or the middle of one of my own stories, I wouldn't really be bothered. I'd close the window, make sure I couldn't hear, and that would annoy me, like the yapping dog. That annoys me. But the fact that they're shooting and the world's doing its crazy thing does not interfere with my focus on the creative stuff. I remember
Yeah.
people talking about, I have to be in the right mood to be creative. I've written about
Mm.
this at length, and I don't have to be in the right mood. I've written stuff in moving cars on the back seat. I've written stuff on airplanes. I've written stuff under the worst conditions. In piazzas in Rome where I had nothing else to do. I've written them there, but I've also written them right before I had to give a speech at a big convention because there is no such thing as writer's block. I mean, if you know what you want to write, then you write it. There's no writer's block. If you sit down before you know what you want to write, that's what causes writer's block. And so it's just, feel so thrilled that I spent most of my life, maybe 80% of it, writing and being creative, working with creative people, and getting movies made and getting books published. And, sometimes just getting a book written is a major achievement. And the fact that it hasn't been published, I go, well, it will be. It will be. Someday it will be.
You describe creativity as the act or the acting out of a creative expression. I get it, completely understand it. I'm on board with that. But there are people who I'm sure have told you, well, I'm not really a creative person. That's not for me. I'm not creative. It's not me. What's your response? What do you say to people who tell you this?
I don't regard myself as a crusader in trying to make everybody creative.
Mm.
I actually don't approve of that. I don't like it. There are all these creative workshops at places like UCLA and USC, in which they try to get your creative juices flowing by telling you to write a journal and blah, blah, blah. To me, creativity hinges on communication. It is communication. I mean, you could tell the greatest joke in the world on the front porch, but if there's nobody on the porch, I mean, how absurd is that? You know what I mean? It's all if a tree falls in the forest and does anybody hear it? To me, that's the heart of the question in creativity. So you write a novel so it can get published or so other people can read it. You create a sculpture so that other people can see it. Florence taught us that at the beginning
Sure.
of the Renaissance, and you write a symphony, as Vienna and other places have taught us, so that somebody can hear it. And if it's some hateful king who's the patron, well, you try to live with that, and if you can't, you find another patron. It's like we're working on a book about the Renaissance now, and in those days, Michelangelo and Da Vinci and all of those guys, they were being called on a daily basis by the kings of France and Spain and, England, asking them to leave Rome or leave Florence and come work for them. And to me, that's a heaven for the artist.
Yeah,
He has an audience clamoring for him. And that's the joy of watching the Academy Awards and seeing somebody finally get an Academy Award who's been at it for years, because that just sort of is a symbol that the world has witnessed that art. But it doesn't make the art better or worse. I mean, it's a great movie, being John Malkovich, for example, whether anybody sees it or not. It's just that there's no point in creativity from the artist's point of view that isn't addressed to an audience. Internal reflection and, thinking about the woes of life, that's important too. But the only reason for doing it is to help other people, to let other people see it. Like I was just thinking about rereading Epicurus the other day, and which I've read over and over again, or Marcus Aurelius. I mean, those guys lived a stoic life in order for them to be able to stand life, but they wrote so they could help others stand life. The whole comment of Epicurus that it's not what happens that matters, it's how you react to what happens. I mean, some people live their whole lives based on that wisdom.
Sure.
And if he hadn't written that,
Well,
think how poor the world would be.
allow me to ask you if that can be even peeled back. I'll give you an example, a personal example. I was always intimidated by people who could draw well, paint well, play music, write well, like all the classical like creative expressions. This is something that always intimidated me. I always wanted to do something like that well. Then I started to like writing myself, and so I would just write poems just for the sake of writing them. And I barely shared them with anybody, just some of my close family and friends for a while. But I still think of myself as a creative being. When I feel frustrated is when I feel like I am not expressing my creativity. And I'm beginning to believe for the last few years that creativity comes from not the act or the overt expression of something, but by wondering and imagining first. Like allowing myself to imagine first.
Right.
And then acting out that imagination. So here's something I don't know. I'm just throwing this out.
I'm trying to figure out like where this leads. Like what are you searching for when you have these thoughts?
Well, it's not that I'm actually what I'm searching for. What I'm searching is to actually have space to imagine. I want to get away from robotic thought, grunt work. I want to get away from computer work, and I just want to free myself from that so I can have imaginative thoughts. Like they give you a completely innocuous example this winter. So I live in a very cold, very cold place. The driveway iced over one evening. I said, how am I going to get rid of this without dumping kilograms of salt on this place all the time? Because then you drag the salt in. For people listening here or watching this who live in cold climates, they know what I'm talking about. Dragging the salt back in from underneath my shoes into the house. I said, I have a little weed killer that's a torch. It's like it's a cane, and you just hold it down. You light this thing, and it kills weeds in between cracks. I said, I'm going to bring that out. I use that in the summer to kill the weeds. I brought it out, and I started to melt the ice. I go, this is wonderful. The only problem is now it's going to take me a long time to melt the whole driveway. But as I'm doing this, I didn't realize that, I imagine that this could help. It's kind of helping. But as soon as I move the flame to another part of the driveway, even if it's like a foot away, the water that came from the ice, the melted ice, started to freeze again because it was so damn cold. But I wouldn't have appreciated that would happen until I had the thought, until I imagined, I could use the weed killer to melt the ice. I wouldn't have had that epiphany that this wouldn't have worked because of that reason. And here I am. I just freed myself out of any judgment. Let's give it a go. I told you it'd be innocuous, but I'm giving you just an example. I can see from your face you have no idea what I'm talking about.
No, I still don't quite understand what the underlying question is. I mean, are you saying that you have to figure it out in your head before you do it in reality?
No. It's actually just having the thought, the freedom of the thought of seeing if something works, just imagining that this could work without judging it, without trying to have figured it out. Just go ahead and doing it. Just doing it because you had this thought that could be a creative one.
Yeah, I mean, I think Leonardo da Vinci is a living example of that. So many thoughts went through his head. Like his journals include designs for the bicycle, which are nearly identical to designs from the 19th century that led to the actual bicycle, and as well as the helicopter.
The helicopter,
And he had no practical reason. He just wondered if it would work. So he actually built flying machines based on his mindless, his brain just wondering.
Yeah. But you said mindless. You said mindless there. Why did you say mindless?
What I mean by mindless is impractical. In other words, if a king wants you to build him a cannon and you're Leonardo, you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're if you're living in Siracusa in ancient Palermo, and you're I think his name was Zeno. No, not Zeno. One of those pre-Socratic philosophers,
Mhm.
and you end up building a magnifying glass that can set the enemy's sails on fire. You know, people start paying attention to you and want to read everything you're doing, and
Yeah, sure.
blah blah blah. But it started out as a practical issue. Um, like the guy who was getting into the bathtub and realized the water was rising and came up with the theory of displacement. Um, so a lot of stuff happens just by happenstance. And yours is an example of where you think of something through and then you realize that it doesn't work because of this reason or that. Um, and it, when it comes to art and creativity, somebody asked once Michelangelo whether it was, how difficult it was for him to carve the David, the incredible statue that the world will never forget.
Hmm.
And he said, carving the David wasn't the hard part. The hard part was seeing David in the marble. And after that, it was just removing everything that was not David. So the thinking process of artists, which I wrote about in my book, A Writer's Time, is a very rigid creative structure. There are several steps to it. Every work of art in any field, and in fact, every work of genius follows the same steps. And part of those steps are something is bugging you in your mind. And if you're a great artist and you've become professional artist, you don't write it down or you don't try to create it. You let it stay there. You let it haunt you. Like Faulkner said when they asked him how he wrote a novel, he said, I don't write a novel. I start thinking about a character. Character starts appearing to me and speaking to me. And I've learned to let the character continue doing that until a bunch of questions come up. And then I start trying to answer the questions one by one. And by the time I've, answered half the questions, the book is ready to come out. He gave us a scene from The Sound and the Fury where a young girl, like 10 years old, is sitting in a fig tree in the rain. Her underpants are muddy. Her knees are scraped. Her knees are not scraped. And she's looking into the window of that house at candles and a funeral. And he said, this is what was going on in my mind. And I had to answer all those questions. Why was she in the fig tree? Well, she was in the fig tree because her brother Jason just pushed her into the creek. And why were her knees not bloody? Because she'd climbed the fig tree so many times, she knew how to climb it. And why was she in the tree at all? Well, she was hiding from him. And why was she not inside the house? Because it was the funeral of her father. And, she ran away from it. So that's the way, and all this happened in his mind until suddenly he was ready to sit down and get it all down. But he learned to not get it all down until he'd figured it all out in his mind. Because as I say in one of my books, never sit down to write until you figured out what you're going to write before you sit down. And that's what he was doing. That's what gets rid of writer's block, is that you don't ever give it a chance to get to you because you've already figured it all out.
Well, I like what you said at the beginning of this quick talk. You said an artist lets it haunt them. Like when you're truly haunted by an idea or the process of your imagination towards an idea, that in and of itself, I think, is one of the most powerful things, one of the most powerful powers a human being has.
Exactly. It's learning how to trick your mind, basically. How to make your mind do what you want it to do instead of letting it control you. And it takes a long time to figure that out. But once you do, it's not a problem. Harlan Ellison, who I knew personally, was one of the greatest science fiction writers of our time and most successful. And he told somebody he could write anywhere at any time, and they challenged him to write a story in the window of Macy's department store on 34th Street or whatever street it is, and in his underwear. So he took the challenge, sat there one morning, and started at 9, and by 11:30 he'd written one of his great short stories right in front of the window. Because he already had figured it out on the way, what the story was going to be. So he was just, as far as he was concerned, he was just typing. And William Saroyan, another great American writer who wrote the human comedy, was asked if it was true that he wrote it in 4 days above a drugstore. He said, no. It took me 20 years to write it. It just took me 4 days to type it out.
Nice.
And that's what I'm talking about. That's where a creative person has learned how his brain works, which is what, I built my theory of creativity on. Here are the steps. They're inevitable. They have to be followed. One of the huge set of steps, there's like 2 sets of steps. One set of steps is abandonment. Is leaving it behind, turning your back on it, walking away. And that is a hugely important step because that's when the inner parts of the brain do their final work and their best work. And if you don't abandon it, you're stuck in its face, and that's when you have writer's block. You know what I mean?
If your mother never encouraged you to write when you were younger, would you have ever been a writer?
One of the things I love about hypothetical questions is it says you don't have to answer them.
Yeah,
because
of course.
It's a waste of time, but you can still speculate. You can speculate on them. And
well, I don't want to waste your time.
No, it's okay.
It's okay.
That's the whole purpose of an interview, right? But we're trying to dissect this creative process a little bit. I think the answer is yes. I think a real writer cannot be stopped, so that if nobody inspires him today, he'll get inspired sooner or later. It might be later. It might be 60 years later. There are all kinds of examples of people who wrote late in their lives because the time had come. I'm glad my mother did that because I wrote horrible stories under her tutelage, that I was embarrassed by. She thought they were wonderful, of course, but, I've found some of them over the years and go, oh, my God, but I think I would have made my way to it one way or the other. Because the ember is burning inside you, and you just need the bellows, the bellows that make the ember catch fire.
Mm-hmm.
She was a handy and inspiring bellows because she wanted to write, but she never had. And the usual reason for people who are writers not to write is fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
Just afraid that nobody will care. And so you just have to live with that. So what? People may not care now, but they'll care later. Moby Dick, one of the greatest works in American literature, was a total failure during Melville's lifetime. And about 10 years after he died, a publisher rediscovered it, and it became, and has remained a bestseller ever since. And so that's not much consolation to the writer in the present time, but it should be, because it means don't stop writing no matter what. You never know when the spotlight will finally move to your work, but that's not the point of it. The point of it is doing it, doing the work.
You're a scholar of Dante of sorts. I mean, Dante did the same. Didn't he not write Divine Comedy as a pauper with no home, excommunicated? Still did it.
Not to mention Cervantes, who wrote Don Quixote in prison.
Yeah. Yeah.
He wrote the whole thing in prison. He was imprisoned by pirates, and he had nothing to do. So he sat there and wrote one of the greatest novels, the first great novel and one of the greatest novels ever written. And Dante did the same thing because of his political problems. And they're unbelievable works. So when you take them apart, it's unbelievable how great they are. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing that both of them had going for them is the isolation the writer had, in getting them done, and the lack of interference. Nobody was bothering either one of them.
You could assume they were both very haunted by
Very what?
something. Haunted.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, when you're absolutely helpless and can't do anything about the world, like the moment we're in now that I was talking about earlier,
Right.
um, what a great time to focus.
You had 16 movies in you almost immediately when you left your tenureship, and you gave me a story about your dad.
Oh yeah, yeah. When I went to Georgetown undergraduate, I was supposed to, I promised my father that I was going to enroll in pre-med, and in the long line of pre-med registration, I was staring across the gym at a card table, at a table with a Etruscan vase on it. And this guy, very dapper man in a three-piece suit, standing there with a smile on his face. And I could see that he was the head of the classics department. And something overcame me. I just walked across the gym and registered for classics instead of medicine. And a few days later, I called my parents. It was a rainstorm, I remember, in Georgetown. I was in a phone booth. I called my father. My father answered the phone. And I said, Dad, I have to tell you something. I didn't register for pre-med. I registered for classics. And there was a dead silence from my accountant father. And he said, well, what are you going to do for a living? And I said, I'll figure it out. I'm not worried about it. He said, well, let me give you your mother here. So my mother got on the line, and she was very happy and praised me for doing it, as did my grandfather. Anyway, I ended up being a tenured professor. That makes my father extremely happy. He's the security guy. Now I have a job where I can't be fired, blah, blah, blah. And I call him one day and say, Dad, I'm going off to Canada to make movies. And he said, what are you talking about? I go, well, I'm thinking about leaving my tenured position. He goes, what would you do for a living? I go, I don't know. I'll figure it out. I'll make movies. And he was very upset and worried. But then I invited him up a few weeks later to come to the set in Montreal, and told him I would give him a bit part in one of the movies. I think it was called The Rose Cafe. And he was kind of interested. And, one night, the night before the shoot, it was 11 o'clock. There was a blizzard outside in Montreal. He said, I want to read the script. Where's the script? And I said, I don't have a copy of the latest script here, Dad. It's at the office. This was like the day we were in the middle of shooting the movie. And he said, well, geez, I don't feel right being in a movie that I haven't read the script. So I called the office, and Montreal doesn't care about blizzards, so they managed to find a way to get a script over to me. I was on the phone all night, so I got in the script so he didn't bug me, and he started reading it while I was on the phone. And then I got off the phone finally and said, so what'd you think? And he goes, well, I don't have a line. I said, Dad, what do you mean you don't have a line? This is Canada. You're an American. You're visiting here as a guest. I can't give you a line. I mean, that isn't even legal. It isn't even legal. So he says, so you just go there and you do your thing. And he was kind of grumpy about it, but he went to bed. And so the next day he was there, and I was tied up at the set doing something else. So I saw them in the distance shooting it, but I didn't hear anything. And about a week later, the director called me and said, I'm going to edit your father's scene. You want to come down to the studio and watch it? And I go, okay, yeah, sure, I'll do it. So I went down there, and all of a sudden I hear my father talking to the main character, the young lady and her girlfriend. And I said, Louis, how did my father get a line? He goes, well, he's your father, and I just thought he should have a line. I thought, oh, hilarious. So he has a few lines. And then a few weeks later, he was back in Kansas City, and I was talking to him on the phone. He goes, whatever you do, keep your present career. This is the right thing to do. He totally switched. First, he was happy I was a professor. So he switched conveniently when something happened that made him have the vision that I was having. You know what I mean? So that was kind of satisfying to me because, here's the guy who wanted me to have a completely secure, lucrative life. And I appreciated his backing me in that way. But I was amused that he was now backing me being a professor. And, there were times when I was a producer, there were times when I was on the verge of bankruptcy and he was saying, do it, declare bankruptcy. It's too crazy. You'll never figure this out. But I always thought he was an accountant. I know about accounting. I will figure this out. And I never did declare bankruptcy. I just, kept going. But he was a huge influence on me, obviously, because he told me the importance of detail. My mother was the wild one who kept telling me to do these crazy things. And he was the guy who told me how to do things in an orderly way.
Well, it probably wasn't so crazy because sounded like you gave your dad a taste of an expansive experience through creative expression. And it sounded like he liked the taste of that cake.
Yeah, it's true. He never would have tasted it otherwise.
Yeah,
but that really wasn't or maybe it was my function in life. I do think one of my function in life is inspiring people and keeping them going. Like when I told a student that it would be immoral if he didn't write the story he was thinking about. Because the minute you hear people say, well, what if I can't sell it? I go, well, don't think about that first. Think about the story first. And if you can't, you can't. Like thousands of writers in the past have not been able to sell all of their works. And in fact, most of the great writers of the 19th century published their own works, self-published. Shakespeare didn't want to take any chances with his plays, so he built, the Queen built him a theater. So all of his plays were produced on the theater that she built for him,
You tell me, or you told me that you teach creatives to manage themselves.
Right.
What does that mean?
Well, there are two kinds of, I learned over the years by studying creativity that there are two kinds of creatives in general. The real creatives and the not real ones, the pseudo-creators. We all know how to distinguish between them. And among the real creators, there are miserably unhappy creators, and there are happy creators like Harlan Ellison, and I started studying the happy ones and the unhappy ones, and I realized that the happy ones understand their mind. They know what they're doing because they've taken the opportunity to analyze their creative mind and figure out how it works and how it doesn't work. And the unhappy ones never did that. So you have a long list of suicides from Virginia Woolf to, Hemingway, just a long way of creative people who were successful, but who couldn't handle it because they never figured out their lives. For example, there's a thing called the postpartum situation that artists go into after they create a work, when they're finished with it. And they're usually not finished with it in their mind until the work is either sold or, published. Mm-hmm. Before that point, they're willing to work on it forever. But when it's finished, they go into a depression. And the depression can last years. It can last the rest of their lives. It can lead to suicide, and which is completely useless because you don't need to do that. What you need to do is when you're like 2/3 of the way through a book or musical composition, you need to stop and you need to abandon it. And the moment you do that is when you understand the ending, when you know where it's going. The minute you see the end of it, you should stop. You walk away and you start the next book or composition, the one you've been thinking about in the back of your mind. You start that and you get a third of the way into it. Then you go back and finish the other one. And there's no time for depression because you're looking forward to getting on to the second one. And there's simply no room in your brain to get depressed. And I think, that works. Believe me, test it yourself and you'll see. I haven't done that forever. And so I published so many things. I can't even count. I used to count them because I was a professor and you have resumes, but
Sure.
I haven't added to my resume for probably 20 years. But since then, I've done a bunch of books and, many short pieces. I used to do book reviews for the Los Angeles Times and several other newspapers, and I did something like 600 of those until one day I decided to stop doing that because I go, no matter how many you do, it's not going to change your life. You need to do bigger things, movies, books. And I still regret not writing reviews because I got great response from my reviews and met incredible people like Umberto Eco wrote me a letter
cool.
and told me that my review of The Name of the Rose was the best review he ever read. He put it into an anthology of essays about The Name of the Rose. So I love that part, but I thought, I don't need it anymore. I don't need that kind of feedback, that kind of, there's a certain point you reach in your life where you don't need positive reinforcement.
Right.
You love what you do. You're confident that you know what you're doing. And it's nice when somebody writes a letter, but doesn't affect your career. You know what I mean?
It's great being free, finally free out of looking for any positive reinforcement.
Right.
It's part
of the freedom myth.
Yeah. So just going back a few minutes ago, you talked about the movie set with your dad. Why did you call it the Rose Cafe in your story?
Oh, because it was first the series was called Shades of Love, and every title, the Rose Cafe was the second movie. The first one was called Lilac Dreams, and the third one was called Champagne for Two, and the fourth one was called Sincerely Violet. There were 16 of them altogether. And the whole idea was that every movie had a color in its title. And this one was because I lived in LA and my best friend and I used to go to the Rose Cafe down in Venice all the time. It still exists, by the way, the Rose Cafe. And so I have a great big piece of glass we made for the movie that says Rose Cafe on it, in some storage place somewhere. And that's why we call it the Rose Cafe, because the leading lady was trying to start her own business. And just as she does that, she runs into a guy that she was in love with years ago, who they never got it together. Parker Stevenson played that guy. And she runs into him, and what she doesn't know is that he's wealthy. He's an entrepreneur, and she's broke. She's worried about the opening of her restaurant because some financing just fell through, and he ends up financing it. And the conflict comes from the fact that suddenly he's her business partner, that she never intended to have dependent on a man. And they have, they fall in love at the same time. That was not planned either. So it's, that was the formula of those movies. So I became good friends with Parker and Christy Alley, his wife, in those days.
Have you ever given a thought of creativity living outside the body? Like
Living where?
Living outside the body. Like you once leaving your body for good. Are you still going to be that creative being?
That's a very philosophical question, which normally I wouldn't spend any time on because I decided long ago that I wasn't religious or philosophical because I just can't answer that question. What I do know how to do is put a story together. So I thought during this lifetime, at least, I should focus on the stories.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know the answer. I mean, I do think that creativity continues through time. And I'd like to believe that I would end up somewhere else in some other body doing creative things. But probably the blunt truth is that deep down, I don't care. All I know is I'm alive now and I'm still feeling these creative vibes and I'm still get to work on it every day. So
I love the honesty. So the only thing I would add there is just another question. Is like, why not ask the question?
yeah. And it's a good question to ask, but it doesn't lead to a story.
But it could. And it's
It
a story that
could,
you
but
could try and figure out in the Rose Cafe.
Yeah, I have an aversion to stories that lead to the other life.
Fair.
I think unless they're religious, unless it's the Divine Comedy and there's a massive religious structure beneath it all. But
Is that because of your upbringing with the Jesuits? Is that what that's tied to?
no, I think I went to Florence. First time I went to Italy was I went to Florence on a fellowship to spend a few months there studying Dante, and I was writing a piece for I don't remember now. It was called Inferno 14, The Idea of Order. And it was how the Divine Comedy was put together and reflected in that canto. And so I went there to study it, and I realized that the Divine Comedy is the closest there is to a perfect work of art, to a perfect poem. There's the terza rima, which is extremely difficult rhyme system, runs through the entire thing. They're interlocked so that the rhymes in Paradiso are reflecting rhymes from the Purgatorio and the Inferno. It is like an obsessively crazy structure because it's so perfect. And it's all about perfection. It's all about the perfection of God and the imperfection of man. And I thought, Dante has done this. He's gone to the other world, and led us there, because I had a whole theory about the two Dantes, the one who we call Dante, who's the author, but then there's Dante the pilgrim who goes on the quest that you start reading about. And his difference between him and the Dante at the end is the Dante at the end knows everything, and the pilgrim does not. So the pilgrim is like us. We learn about hell and purgatory and paradise through him, as Virgil or somebody teaches it to him. And I thought, this guy has done it. There's nothing to do here. Everything after that tries to deal with the other life, somebody going to the other world, it just seems comical because, it starts with the Odyssey and the Virgil. Dante swallowed them both and perfected them both. So, yeah, that's probably the reason. It's a literary reason.
Dante, the author, must have been bored to tears with life. If he wasn't, life outside of his writing, he must have been bored by it.
Well, what was going on was much like today's world, where Florence was being torn apart by these two parties. And there was nothing he could do about it. He belonged to one of the two parties, but his party was out of power and out of favor, and there's nothing he could do. I mean, he was basically sent into exile, and that's where he wrote, like Cervantes in prison, or
Sure.
That's where he wrote this. And I know it affected me because I go, I don't want to do that. I just don't want to be in his shadow and writing something like that.
Last question. What does greatness mean to you?
That's a really good question because it's what you, as an artist or a person, what you're measuring yourself against is your own concept of greatness. And failing miserably, uh, according to Teddy Roosevelt, is not failing at all. It's what great people do. So if you choose that convenient definition of it, then I'm happy. But part of me doesn't really believe that because I do believe that your greatness comes from the number of people you influence, the number of people who read your stuff and get touched by it. I can tell you a quick funny story. I met Lillian Hellman one day. I don't know if you know who she is.
No.
She's one of America's greatest playwrights. She, what's it called? Something in Toys in the Attic and the children's. I can't remember her name or plays right now, but I wrote a review for the LA Times of a wonderful book called Charlie Boy. And the author, Peter Feebleman, called me one day out of the blue to thank me for the review. And I told him I'm glad he enjoyed it. And he said, I have a friend coming to town who would like to meet you, and I'd love to have you over for dinner. So I go, okay, well, that's nice. He lived in Hollywood, and I went over to his house on the hills, and the friend who he sat next to me was Lillian Hellman, who I couldn't believe, I couldn't believe it. Anyway, she had read my book on the Iliad. She was one of the 64 people in the world who read it. She told me this is the best book I've ever read.
Oh,
And she went on at length about my chapter on Helen. She said that's the best thing I ever read. So I thought, here I am talking to one of the most intelligent, creative women in the world about my little academic book that no one else has read. So we became, correspondents after that. And that's one of the examples of, I wrote a book, somebody did read it, only a few people in the world, but she was one of them. And that was worth my whole life right there. I mean, that was why you write. It's hoping that somebody will read it. And seeing my name in a footnote somewhere to this day is thrilling because, a complete stranger thought my work, whatever book it was they were quoting, was good enough to put in there. So I felt like part of the human race, it makes you feel part of something. The dialogue that goes back since cave times, you're part of it. And that's, to me, greatness is to be able to feel good about that. Some of the greatest writers in terms of public acclaim were miserable human beings, as we all know, and, died unhappy and so on. So that measurement doesn't really work. So greatness to me is doing everything within your power to express yourself fully while you're alive. That's what Edmund Burke meant when he said, if you live, you should speak your mind. It's just wrong not to, if you have that kind of urge and talent, no matter how talented it is, you need to do something with it. And in my case, you need to help other people do something with it. So that's what I do all day is I'm either writing myself. Right now, I'm in not a good state because I haven't chosen my next project. My recent book just came out a couple of months ago. And by now, I usually would be well into the next one. But I have a huge project that I think I should do next. And I've got some of it done, but it's overwhelmingly ambitious and crazy ambitious.
can you share?
And no, I really shouldn't, because that's one of the signs that you're losing interest in the project is when you start talking about it, because talking is so much easier than writing.
Than doing it, yeah.
But ask me a month from now or ask me a year from now. Part of what's happening is it's about a very current subject that everybody in the world is aware of. And I'm kind of letting it play out more before because I'm trying to figure out the ending of my book. And I've written pages and pages and kind of figured out the characters, but I can't, my brain won't let me finish it until I have better options for the ending.
Well, keep haunting yourself.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to do.
Ken, an enlightening and real conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity for it.
It's lots of fun.
It's great to talk about it.
Lots of fun. Thank you.